Okay, I think we should start. I can see that some people are still watching the film actually, but they might hop in. I see that more are hopping in now. So, welcome. What happens when politicians and decision makers do not play their role in protecting the planet and the population from climate change? Ordinary people like you, me, like Abby, like Bill, Felicia, Joe, or Adam put themselves on the line to fight the climate crisis. This selfless engagement is not risk-free for their families, their relationship, or their freedom generally. But besides that, they don't hesitate to do whatever it takes to save the world. Something that the film showed very well, I believe. Welcome to our panel discussion about the film, The Race to Save the World. My name is Sarah Shaban. I'm the Global Community Manager at We Don't Have Time, and I'll be leading or moderating the panel discussion today. We Don't Have Time is the world's largest platform for climate action, with 25 million reach every month. On We Don't Have Time, you can stay updated about climate news. You can engage in climate dialogues with organizations or companies. You can send them climate love if you think they're doing good for the climate, or instead send them climate warning if they don't. You can also share your climate ideas with our community. So I engage you to join us if it's not already the case. Calling me from the US today, I have with me Abby Brockway and Bill Moyer, which you should recognize after watching the film. I also have Joe Gantz, the director of the film, with me. And in Sweden, I have Adam Wallin, head of climate dialogue at We Don't Have Time. If you wish to ask questions to our panelists, you can use the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar, or you can also raise your hand to jump in this discussion more directly. Felicia Wieding will be helping me with the question from the audience. But first, I would like to leave the word to our panelists, and if you could all introduce yourself to our audience. Maybe Abby, you could start.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Abby, and well, you know I'm a mom, and you met my husband, Roger, in the film. My husband and I own a small carpentry and painting business, so I'm a painting contractor. I am a ordained elder and deacon in the Presbyterian Church, which is a layperson's position. What else? My favorite color is purple.
Well, you could say what you did in the film.
Yes, if you could just say, what was your wake-up call when it comes to climate action, let's say?
My wake-up call was July 6th of 2014, a train right by our house kind of tipped over. It was an oil train, and it was just right in a rail yard that was a mile from my daughter's school. And although it was summertime, it was just so close to too close to comfort. And recently, before that, trains were exploding all over the country, oil trains. And I learned a lot about it. I didn't read any novels or anything besides technical details of exploding trains. And it was just so symbolic of fossil fuels coming into our region. And really, the companies wanted to export fuel to China when we finally got Barack Obama to try to do some stuff, but then he would say one thing and do another. So I just felt like our government wasn't doing what was needed. And so that's why the group of the five of us, we were known as the Delta 5, blocked an oil train that was headed towards Anacortes with a tripod. And interestingly enough, we met and learned about what we were going to do at Bill's Backbone Campaign's action camp. So there's a lot of connections within the people from the Pacific Northwest. And I would say one of the things is that I'm mostly an unlikely activist in that I had a daughter in middle school and had a lot going on. And it seems usually that young people out of college are activists as they're finding themselves and have a little bit more flexibility in their life. And then I found that a lot of grandparents after they retired were doing it for their children and grandchildren, but that people that are kind of in the middle of their careers and things like that seem to not have as much time because of the demands. But I just felt like it did, like, I don't know, there was a large group. I'm not saying that people don't do it, but I would say that that seemed like an unlikely activist for a mother on Labor Day, the day before my daughter started middle school, to risk arrest.
Sounds great. I would like to continue. Maybe Bill, you can introduce yourself, as we
Sure.
talked about backbone already.
Okay, so my name's Bill Moyer, and I live on Vashon Island near Seattle. And some friends and I hang out with a bunch of artists, people who do giant puppets and sculptors and musical folks. And it was actually during the Bush administration that we got so frustrated with the leadership of our country on so many fronts, not just climate, but that we started to get together for potlucks once a month. And that led to the formation eventually of a back campaign. But really, it started with building giant puppets and signs and trying to bring a creative voice into anti-war and environmental work. And then we've been doing that for about 18 years. So I feel very lucky because I'm supported by my community to do this work. So I feel like that's unique, and I'm very fortunate. But I'm also supported by this incredible community of creative people. So that was sort of the genesis of my engagement at this stage of my life. But I actually have been active since I was a kid in various things, from anti-nuclear to opposing U.S. foreign policy interventions and military interventions and such. But to me, it became clear over years of engaging with giant imagery that trying to always attack things at the national level was sometimes not as fruitful as trying to find the ways that where corporate and elected power, the collusion between corporate and elected power impacts communities. And I feel like that's what the message that I would like to bring is that people protect what they love. And so that we have greater leverage when we find the manifestations of climate change and pollution and the impacts of bad policy and corruption in our own communities, and then we harness the creativity and the spectacle of things like Backbone Campaign for that. And it was honestly through that process of addressing a local fight against an industrial gravel mine that we started to use some. And that was, and then we were very inspired by the impact of what it was like to be on a kayak. We can talk more about that later. But then a series of, that's what started us doing action camps and integrating water protests as part of our curriculum, if you will.
I see. We'll come back later on the individual versus the systemic change and impact of this. But that's great to starting to talk about it already. Joe, if you would like to say some words about yourself.
Well, I've been making documentary films for 30 years. For many years, I did television mostly and some film. And then about 10 years ago, I felt like I could no longer do what I considered more serious or thoughtful television, and I decided I was just going to focus on social action documentaries, and did a series of films, 3 films, where I made these films and also raised the funding for the films. The first one was American Winter, on families falling from middle class into poverty. And then I worked on this one, as well as one on stem cell research and regenerative medicine, sort of at the same time. But the feeling about needing to do a film on climate change from my perspective, and that is, my approach is what I call life in progress, where I choose once I choose the subjects, I try to fade into the background and let their lives let them go about their lives organically, and then kind of create the story and the editing. And in that way, it becomes, I think, much more authentic and intimate, and the viewer gets connected to the person and then gets brought into the issue. And that way, an issue that can be controversial, and in this country, it seems that almost every important issue is super controversial. So it can draw in people from various backgrounds and opinions, rather than, you know, am I going to like that film? Well, if not, I'm not going to watch it, and that sort of thing. But my feeling about climate change films when I began this was that many climate change films, and maybe even most climate change films, were telling people how bad things are and how much worse they're going to get. All true, but very depressing and overwhelming to the viewer. And I found myself, you know, having to steel myself to watch one of these films, and like, okay, I'm going to watch it. I got to be ready to be super depressed, but I need to watch this. And at some point, I felt that the information in these films was in the ether. People knew how bad things were, and either they were letting that information in or they were blocking it out. But I felt that if I made a film that followed people who were in the trenches doing whatever they could to fight climate change, and did it in a very authentic way, that it would be more uplifting and inspiring rather than overwhelming and depressing. And I found that to be true. I found that you know, following these folks that are doing what they can, it's just you know, it's exciting to be in a movement. It's exciting to be among a group of people who are committed and passionate about, you know, saving the planet. And as Miriam said, you know, taking action is the antidote for despair. So I think that this film is hopefully going to inspire people that are kind of on the sidelines feeling, what can I do? What can one person do? I hope that this film, you know, inspires people to jump in and do whatever they can, whatever they want to do, but just to do something, because we don't have a lot of time.
Yes, I think we all very much agree on that. And I think we all agree that the film was very inspiring to act. But Adam, would you like to say some words about yourself before we move on?
Yes, definitely. So, yeah, hi everyone. My name is Adam. I'm the head of climate dialogue at We Don't Have Time. And before I started working here, my climate work all started when I was studying to become a conservational biologist. My dream was kind of to work with like discovering how different species interacted in different ecosystems. That was really my passion growing up. But then when I was studying my bachelor's in conservation biology, the realization crept up on me that everything we're learning is about how do these species interact with one species in the world, and that is the human race. So there wasn't the interplay that I was really dreaming of doesn't exist anymore, because every species is trying to survive us. So that's where I really started to come into the more anthropogenic environmental issues, and I became more and more interested in climate change. I started studying behavioral science and climate communication, specifically related to climate engagement and the knowledge action gap that Joe just talked about. The fact that we know, a lot of us actually know how bad things are, but we don't actually do enough anyway. So that's what I really wanted to figure out. Why is that, and what can we as communicators do to change that, right? So that's what I wanted to do. I wrote my master's on it, and then I started working in the NGO sector for about a year, just talking to people, engaging locally in different climate areas. I engaged in Fridays for Future, for example, and just trying to get as much engagement as possible using serious but solution-focused communication, which is really the key here, to focus on what needs to be done while not diminishing what will happen if we don't do it. So that's so that's what I did, and then now starting to work within time, I can really continue working with this with all of our members and all of our partners. So I'm really happy to be here talking about a film which really encapsulates a lot of what I've been trying to do as a communicator.
Great. So I would like to talk a bit more about the film, which you started talking about, Joe, so we can jump on that. The film depicts really intimate portraits of yourselves and your family, Abby and Bill. How was it to be involved in such a process? What did you learn about yourself through making the films, and how's the film impacted your life since it's been released actually in April? Who would like to start between you two?
I nominate Bill.
That was tricky. All right. Joe and his crew were very gracious, and it was surprising. My family, because I am engaged as an activist, there's kind of a bit of a bubble around my family, as just to protect it, to have the privacy, and to not engage in the. Sometimes activists are always in fight mode, and it's kind of difficult sometimes to turn it off when you come home, because we can't always be like this, right? So inviting Joe in was a bit of a challenge for my family and I, but my wife and daughter are very supportive, and they're also I think we all felt honored, because honestly, I wasn't one of the first subjects of this video. I had introduced Joe to other people, and so it was an honor. And his crew is always very gracious, and I always felt like whenever he came in, he had the way of bringing us to having an authentic conversation about whatever was going on, and I think that comes through in film. And I think is all credit to Joe and his great crew, and then amazing editing. And then in terms of, honestly, I wasn't thinking a lot about the film at any point until honestly recently, because now what the film has become is a way to share people like yourselves some of the lessons learned, and to have a dialogue, a global dialogue, which is really exciting, about what does it mean to be a change agent? How do we participate both in the very hyper local work of decarbonization and shifting out of this paradigm of extraction, and simultaneously be part of a global movement. So I've found this very exciting time, and I'm very honored to be here today as a part of that process.
Abby?
So I said yes before realizing that my whole family would be involved in it, which is kind of how it goes for me. I'm like the person in the family who is very spontaneous and says yes as much as I can. So I think my family had to be brought on board a little bit. I think there was already kind of a fatigue for how intense I was about the work of the climate. And I think one of the things I realized was important about this film is that there really are no heroes, and behind the scenes, it's still messy. It's not pretty, but like the vulnerability is the thing that I want to model to my daughter. I want to that's what we have to do. I feel like we have our back up against the wall. That vulnerability is, I mean, it's important in this work. So I felt okay about that. It was always an exercise of reminding myself about that commitment to vulnerability, because at times, you know, like when I've only watched the film once, it's very hard for me to watch. With the hours and hours of film that was done, I just kept thinking, why wasn't this part in it? Why is this part in there? And Joe and I have had great conversations. I just really trusted him, and I adore him. And, you know, we're still connected. I appreciate his art form and what his gifts and talents are and how he's plugged into this movement. And I got to say, in this area, the Pacific Northwest, we've had a little bit of like, I want to say, fear of like being undermined by, I can't, I mean, like, you know, the police or whatever, like ulterior motives to try to get our movement to look bad or something. I think we all are concerned about that. So there is some like protections that we take. And so Joe had a very difficult time having access to people, because we did have this bubble around us, just like Bill said with the family. We protected ourselves from with our work. We just had a few incidences within the larger activist community where you feel like if you're discredited, that could depower your movement. And so that was a very tricky thing to make the film, is just allowing some guy from LA to come in and like tell our story when, you know, I mean, that was just a huge thing.
Did you feel this very challenging, Joe, to come from another place and trying to come in another community in the end?
Well, every documentary film has its challenges, and there are different challenges each time. No documentary film has a roadmap. You have to kind of figure it out as you go. This was especially challenging because each community of activists has their community where there's a sense of, we know each other, we trust each other, we have each other's back, we're going to do everything to protect each other. And the outside world is a little bit suspect. And sometimes the outside world is actually more than suspect. It's dangerous. And, you know, in the case of climate change, it's toxic, so there's good reasons for, you know, not trusting, you know, corporations and police and you know, you don't know where people stand. But I wanted to follow people. When I started, I spent 6 years on this film. When I started the film, I thought I was going to be open to people who were fighting climate change on any level. And I followed scientists, and I followed journalists and professors and people who've written books. And then I just kind of said to myself, a lot of these people, you don't know how committed they are. You don't know how deeply committed they are. You know, someone who's making their living fighting climate change as a professor or a journalist or something. I mean, yes, they're smart, they know the issues, blah, blah, blah. But I thought that, you know, they're making their living fighting climate change. I'm less interested in that. And so And then you have people who are scientists and coming up with alternative energy solutions, and they're going to make a fortune if it works. So I decided I just was going to follow everyday people who were doing whatever they could. And then I decided I also wanted to follow people, especially that were risking arrest. And that group, there's a law in the United States. I don't know if it's every state, but I think it's most states. If you risk arrest by, say, blocking an entrance or something, it's a misdemeanor. So you can be arrested, but it's a misdemeanor and you don't risk much, but, and that's not saying what the people in the film did was just a misdemeanor, but I'm saying if you just go to a protest, you refuse to leave when they say leave, or you block an entrance, it's one thing. But if you conspire to do that, if 2 or more people conspire, it can be a felony. Now, they rarely enforce that, but that is a danger. And so you have to be very careful in a way. And so when I was filming, I wanted to be careful not to show the planning, because everybody knows when 100 or 1,000 people show up at the same time for a protest or to block an entrance or to stop something from happening, it didn't just happen coincidentally, but I didn't want to show it on camera, the planning of that. And so there was all these issues, and I did have to deal with the trust issue in general. I am an older person than many of the activists. I am from LA, which is suspect. I had a professional crew, which is maybe questionable. And so it took a while to, find the right people that had the level of trust that it would need to let me just be there in the background, following their life. And of course, as Abby pointed out, I wanted to follow the families, and I wanted to talk to everybody in the family, and I wanted it to be very personal. And so that took a level of trust. And I think it certainly was worth it. In the end, I spent 6 years on this, but it took me, 2 or 3 years to find the right subjects. So I just stuck with it and stuck with it and stuck with it. And finally, it works out if you never give up.
Adam, you are not part of the film, but you've watched it. And as you said, you have experience with activism yourself. Would you like to share your view on the importance of such films when it comes to climate action? Do you think a film can be a good call to action in the end?
Yeah, there's so many emotions that are brought up by the film in different sections and in different ways. And I could say it's so clear there's not one single message in the film. There's so many different messages that all kind of go together in one big message, or what you want to say. I could cite examples all the time, but for example, like the scene in the church with you, Abby, before your trial, I think that was the first scene that I was like really struck by, because it was such a clear, beautiful example of how a community can just come together, even though everyone aren't, of course, engaged in the way you are, but they can still come together and understand this like care for our common planet. And there's so many moments like that are so important, I think. And I spent the time watching the film figuring, like, kind of flip-flopping between, is this film actually going to inspire people to take climate action? And the reason I did that is because it's such a raw depiction of climate action. It's in no way euphemistic, or in no way like trying to make it look pleasant, because I guess there is that, or at least here in Sweden, there is that kind of misunderstanding that climate activists are like lazy or just there to complain or don't want to contribute. But this film makes it so clear that, it takes a lot from you. You have to sacrifice so much to really really put yourself out there. So I'm not sure if the film would inspire so many to take climate action themselves. Of course, some will, but I think the film does a really good job at making people understand the people who do become activists, and even get people to maybe sympathize with them in a way that I think will make it more acceptable, will shift the kind of norm a little bit. And I think that's extremely important in today's society where everything is so controversial, as you said, Joe. So that was definitely, I think that was the main thing that I felt, that there's a lot of,
yeah, you know, not to interrupt, but to add to that thought, is the media and you know, other people who are spreading misinformation try to undermine activism as something, you know, if they can first of all, they want to create misinformation about climate change, but then if they can undermine activists and try to make it seem like these people are not having our best intentions in mind, they will do that. In fact, they're trying, in this country, they're trying to tie it to terrorism, you know, I mean, anything they can do to undermine it. And then, you know, if you just try to make it real and you're there with these folks and they're the regular people, you can relate to them, you tend to like them, you tend to identify with their family and the issues that their family has, then that just certainly demystifies all that propaganda, perhaps.
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's very much what I mean. We can create connections and also, yeah, increase understanding that these activists are people. They're not just hippies that want to like ruin your life. Basically, they're actually people who are struggling with this in their own lives as well, which I think is really a really important message, actually. So yeah, well done on that, I would say.
Would you like to comment on that, Abby and Bill?
Well, I think that the idea that it creates sympathy for the actors, the people who are the activists, is a nice point. You know, I always want to be doing actions that when the people see it on TV, like they want to bake brownies for us, you know, or they want to they identify with the people who are doing whatever action it is, and that it become what I would call unassailable. That the actions of the people are taking aren't necessarily the actions that they would take, but they see them as defenders of their values and their aspirations, for feel affinity. One of the people in the Q&A asked about, maybe it was Johanna, I'm not sure, or Joanne. Whether there's a particular type of action that makes sense to do or is more efficient. And my initial response to that, and something I try to deliver as often as possible, is that we have lots of allies that we don't know that are our allies. If we specifically, I think, need to be very careful as activists not to close off what it means to be a change agent or limit it to the definition of what we think is a typical activist. I think that the people like Joe, you know, we don't necessarily think of him as an activist if you just saw him with his crew, right? But he's a storyteller, and that's an absolutely essential role for us to see ourselves and to tell a story to the world. Or, you know, they're farmers and people who are being what I would call solutionaries, doing things from the next paradigm that is about extraction, that is, you know, about regeneration. Those people are change agents. The people who are doing culture work around sense of place, those are change agents. And the people who are organizing in their community around other justice issues and equity issues, those are change agents. And so to me, I think when we start to see and celebrate the breadth of engagement and how we reflect our values in the world and act upon those values, then we begin to be able to see self-identify as a much larger movement, and also not exclude people, but celebrate their work. And I think that the best way to get solidarity is to show solidarity, and to do that by celebrating what other people are doing, I think is a powerful tool. And so maybe this creates an openings for that dialogue.
I'll just respond to Adam's comment about the church, because I found that was a very special moment for me, in that our church has a large building and we try to invite people to be able to use this to share our space. And so me being a climate activist, people would come up to me and asked if they could use the space. And so we had 350 Seattle use the space to make big art. We had Extinction Rebellion come in, and each time someone came in, I'd have to present that and say, this group is going to come in, and people are like, Extinction Rebellion, what is that? That sounds, I mean, they hear the word extinction and they're like, are they like this dangerous group? And so I had the opportunity to educate them about that. And then the Pledge of Resistance, like, oh my gosh, what's that about? So I had to, explain to them about that. So they knew a bunch of people were using our building. But then we had this Climate Sunday where we were, the Delta 5 were blessed before the trial, the day before the trial. And I did the sermon, and the congregation members were able to meet my activist community. And the activist community, several of those people are very anti-church because of the historical trauma that our church has done in the past. But I think the activists meeting my church and hearing the messages that we were talking about were so surprised at our openness and our commitment to social justice and trying to redefine the awfulness of our church history. And also the congregation was able to see this huge community coming together and working so hard. And so for my groups to merge, and for the congregation, people came up to me and just said, this was the most amazing, powerful service that we've had. And I think hearts and minds were changed and expanded in things like this. So you never know how people are going to be woken up or sparks are going to be lit under people. And so I feel like just being on the lookout for those unlikely encounters or places to actually waken people.
I'd like to add to that a little bit. So I filmed a lot with Abby and Roger, and I think it was very interesting for the viewer, because Roger in the beginning, I didn't totally get it, didn't totally get the level of passion that Abby brings, the level of commitment that Abby brings, and the fact that she is going to go, more or less go forward with this, whether he approves or not. And then you got to see Abby and how kind of pure and open her commitment was, and because they love each other and because they care deeply for each other, they were expressing their feelings very directly and openly in a way that the viewer gets a microcosm of two worlds, period. This is a husband and wife who care deeply about each other, but there are people who are not husband and wife. One person says, why do you have to do this? This is disruptive, and I don't want my world disrupted. I don't want any waves here. And then the other person say, we got to make change. We have no choice. There's no time. If we don't do this, it'll be too, whatever. And so that is a microcosm in a way of two different points of view. But when you see it among two loving people in a family, you get to connect with those in a way that I don't think you'd get the same perspective if you brought two strangers and said, go ahead and let's argue this out. And so I think that lets people in who are, coming from either of those perspectives, and lets them kind of connect with that and hopefully move towards an openness towards activism and you know, trying to save our planet.
Very much agree. I think that's something that also underline on our platform. The idea is to create dialogues between stakeholders that have very different interests in the end in order to make climate action. So I think we agree that trying to create communication between people that have very different goals and objectives is the way to move forward, actually. I have a question from the audience here about the fear of being arrested and the impact that this might have on your life. Do you have any comments or general reflection on how to think and act about this fear, specific fear?
Bill, you
Abby,
wanna
maybe?
address
Or Bill?
I actually, because I'm self-employed and I've never worked for anybody, I had the privilege of not worrying about being hired or, you know, what any employees are going to think about it. So like that risk was not really there. One thing that I was surprised about is how I only spent 24 hours in jail, but there's not a week that goes by and before, you know, right the year of, I thought about the women in jail and how awful the jail was in some ways, and how I didn't want to get sucked into that issue because I feel like there's so many issues to work on and that climate could be an umbrella for a lot of these issues. But I feel like if every member of our society had to go to jail at some point, our society would change. I would not be afraid to go to jail again. It's life-changing. It shifts perspective. Yeah, so I think it's a powerful thing.
I also feel, well, the first time I was arrested was a long time ago, and it was in the 80s. And I still remember it very profoundly, the decision to not move when I was told to move. And I grew up an obedient child. I was a good kid, you know, and I didn't, to go against what some person of authority is telling me made me feel uncomfortable. Like I wanted to cry, you know, but I decided to just stay there. And that threshold of moving through my own little emotional thing, you know, was profound. And I think of, I sometimes like to say that rebellion is a muscle that needs to be exercised, because so many of the rules that we follow are unspoken rules, and they're not, and the constraints are much more, much tighter in our imaginations than they are in actuality. The things that the Backbone Campaign does are primarily legal things, shining lights on buildings from public property, holding giant banners rather than tiny signs at overpasses over freeways. You know, one friend, when you're in an action like this, you think it's what you see before you may look like a wall, but it might only be a curtain when you approach it, and you can walk through it. So there's the illusion. Getting through our imaginary constraints is part of the problem, part of the process, I believe, of coming into our own power. And similarly, I say that it's very important that those of us with privilege are not going to be shot or tortured or disappeared, or any of these other horrible outcomes that can happen in other places and to people of others, or that we have a fundamental responsibility to spend that privilege, to not to just soak and lay back and you know, in this lavish privilege of a very racist, in a very racist world. So so we have an obligation to move through those imaginary boundaries and spend the privilege that we have as a way of recalibrating this world. And so I think that I don't think it's a responsibility for everybody to go to jail or everybody to risk arrest. I think it is a responsibility of people of privilege to overcome, to spend that privilege. Chuck.
Adam, maybe?
Yeah, I want to add, I haven't been arrested, full disclosure, but I just wanted to add as well, like if you for some reason haven't been convinced by what the great things that Abby and Bill have been saying, I also want to add that most actions to take part in most actions, you don't need to do anything illegal. I mean, there's people around that are doing things that aren't illegal, but are extremely important for the action to actually work. So if you're still not convinced, then try going to an action and just not do something illegal and see how it goes. And then, yeah, that will probably help you understand if it's for you or not, basically.
Yeah, I would.
And I would always. I just want to clarify one thing, that I don't think it's. I think people should go to the edge of what they're ready for, and then they should get through and then lean into the next edge. I don't think people should force themselves to do something that's uncomfortable. And honestly, most of the things we do, like Adam was indicating, don't involve anything like arrest. I haven't been arrested in years, even though I've been detained and this and that other thing. It's but it's the a willingness to go to lean into the edge of your comfort and to make that a learning place. Then to find comfort there, and then and find your center there, and then lean into the next edge. And as organizers, we need to make sure that there's lots of entry points for people, so that people do not have to be forced into a situation that's going to create a revulsion or a panic that they're not experience that they're not ready for. Check.
Totally. I would say at the Delta 5 action, there must have been 30 or 40 people behind the scenes, and they were all extremely necessary to safely do what we did. And the other thing that I came away with was, you know, there's groups of people that we decide, we lump together and decide are a certain thing, just as activists are sometimes lumped together and decided that we're a certain thing. But in my training, one of the things that I was told was, don't talk about details of your action in jail. You know, a lot of people are not in jail because they wanted to be, and you've made a decision to commit to being in jail. And so don't talk to the police when, you know, at all. And my arresting officer, I connected with on so many levels. He was very supportive, and he started trying to talk to me about what he saw and observed. And I was telling him I can't talk to him, but in the end, I had seen when he was buckling me in is he had 3 bracelets with girls' names on it. So I knew he was a father of 3 girls. And I think we connected because we're parents. And although he was in a position where he couldn't actively support me or sign the petition that I asked him to sign and that kind of thing, he was so moved by the people that were behind the scenes. They were standing alongside the road cheering for me. And he was so moved by the community of support and the dedication to these people that were trying to protect what we loved. You know, we were not trying to cause trouble or ruckus. And the respect that we had for the police, I think, was one of those things where you make these bridges and these connections. My judge was the most amazing judge, even though I was very frustrated by the outcome. He was very, you know, and he was in a position where we couldn't tell if he was supportive or not supportive or whatever, but he really struggled with making fair decisions. And, had to risk his career in some cases to follow the law, allow precedents to be rewritten, which he didn't, but I could tell he struggled, and he reversed some decisions and said, and showed his humility and said comments about us at the end of the trial. So I think the takeaway for me is that any person you approach could have their hearts and minds changed if in the right situation. And so what I wanted to also mention was that in a lot of this activism that we do, I found that humor and fun things can really disarm people and cause them to see things differently. And the police officer that arrested me mentioned, we were singing songs, and he goes, "You guys had good voices." One of the people, Jackie Minshew, was a retired elementary music teacher. So I mean, seeing those things, or like just the Yes Men, I watch them on YouTube and stuff. They just do ridiculous things that make you go, what? And, flash mobs, or like, there was a white supremacist rally, and across the street, they started singing and dancing to La Bamba, and it completely threw them off, and they were flummoxed. And so like disarming people and showing that side, I think, surprise, like there's cracks and there's openings that we can't always imagine.
It's great we're talking about humor and happy things, because when looking around these days, it's pretty grim with heat waves, pipelines exploding, and so on. And sometimes it really feels like giving up, or that, it's already over. There's no way we can save the world anymore. What would you say to people? How would you talk to people to take climate action in this type of context? And maybe someone wants to answer that? Adam, maybe? You haven't talked for a while.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to keep talking. I think my number one response to people who say that it's too late is that we talk about climate change as clear, like set goals and set limits, but it's not one point where everything goes to hell and before that point everything is fine. Climate change is a continuum, right? So the very important fact that IPCC keeps stressing is that every 1/10 of a degree Celsius is extremely important. So even if you get the feeling that, well, I mean, it's too late, then my counter question is, too late for what, right? Because it's still, even if it's too late to meet one goal, we're still able to avoid like countless amounts of suffering if we don't let it get any further than that. So there's always a reason to keep fighting. There's never a reason to stop fighting. You can always keep going, because it can always get worse, which isn't a very nice thought to have, but it's the truth that there's always a reason to keep going, basically.
Someone wants to add something.
I had listened to a poet some years ago speak about this, and she used the analogy of a river. Trying to remember. Oh, so you say this river that's like going straight, and it's creating this canyon, and you really need to slow down the river, and so you drop some trees or some gravel, you cause the river to start to bend, and where you drop those trees or that gravel, it sucks, and then trees will emerge, and the river will gradually be more slow, and in a sense, no matter what the future, good for everybody if we create these where things can grow, because really we're not just about stopping, We're about growing the alternative. And so, like the Chinese have a saying, when's the best time to plant or the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. But the next best time to plant a tree is right now. So causing things to grow and trying to live that other paradigm is a huge part of our work. And even if it becomes the place where we're preserving something beautiful, you know, that is worth everything. Like preserving something beautiful is worthy of our time and our attention. And without guarantee, it's not our, like other wise people have said, it's not our job to know if we're be victory, or we shouldn't care if it's about if we are going to win or achieve it all. I don't know. I'm not saying this properly. Our job is to do the work. Our job is just to do the work, and our life will be better if we do the work, and our children's lives will be better if we do the work. So let's do the work.
Yeah, that reminds me of a cartoon that I like by Joel Pett, and it says, "What if it's a big hoax and we just create a better world for nothing?" So like, why not try? But the other honest thing I want to say is that some weeks I just say, screw it. Like, I'm just going to party and enjoy my life and try not to think about it anymore. So there's swings to about strategy and what's the best way, you know, what should we be doing now? And it can be really frustrating. So it ebbs and flows.
And also, I think that one thing I tried to show with the film is that, you know, there's a lot of excitement and positive energy in activism. And I mean, I was around for the tail end of the Vietnam era. There was great music, great clothes, you know, a lot of humor, as Abby was talking about, by different activists. And, you know, I think that what people maybe don't realize if they haven't joined and jumped in is that, you know, it can be very frustrating and depressing to be reading the news and looking at sad documentaries about our future, or even some of these sad apocalyptic films that are fiction about our future. But when you jump in and you really try to get involved in making change, you know, it's, you know, you meet some great people, there's great energy, you're accomplishing something, you're moving forward, and it's a whole different feeling. So I hope this film contributes in some small way to getting people to make that leap.
Hope that too. I have a question from the audience, from Sky. So Sky, if you want to ask your question now, you can just talk.
Hello, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So first of all, I really want to thank, we don't have time so much, for coordinating this and bringing this out, because I know a lot of people have been saying that it hasn't, you know, the whole commercial thing and the money thing, you know, has been a really big factor, and to have community of people. And so thank you so much, Joe, also for bringing this film and the activism piece to this, because that's really what needs to happen, is people need to stand up. So at the same time, I also want to let everyone know that I live as a settler on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations of the Coast Salish people in Vancouver. And for being able to live and have that privilege, I really just want to hold up my hands to them and thank them for being being here and living in this place of privilege, as Bill was talking about. And it really is incumbent on us right now, because if we stand back, it's just like what happened with Jewish people, or what's happened with the indigenous people. If you look at what happened with the railroad and the settlers that came across, and all of the deaths that happened because people sat back and didn't do anything. And so I really am so appreciative, because we are at a different type of gold rush. We are at an oil rush, and it's the same signature. And so I really thank you so much for all the work you guys are doing.
Thank you, Sky.
So,
do you have a question?
I do have the question. So that was my comment. And so the question is, because I know when COVID when it started, there was quite a bit of action, a lot of youth-led, the sustainability and other, great actions that were happening, and lots of crowds, and it really felt like a great movement. But since COVID happened, of course, that's kind of all collapsed. So I'm wondering, how do we get that energy back again? How do we start creating something and have that 20 million plus type of activation like back in the 1970s, so that we can get that energy and really push back on industry and really make politicians stand up?
Thank you for your question, Sky. Someone wants to answer that?
I can start with a small remark that even though COVID has prevented a lot of the very large-scale, visible, physical actions, I know that a lot of things have been happening kind of behind the scenes on the internet. There was a question about digitalization earlier, and I think this very much ties to that COVID has taught us to really connect over borders, and that's something that the youth activists have known how to do all along. So, I mean, Fridays for Future spread worldwide really quickly, and I think in the digital arena, this has continued. The planning has continued. Not everything, but a lot of things have kept going. So, I honestly believe that once we return to some sort of normalcy from the pandemic, I think a lot of things will kick up automatically, and I think it will definitely take a few months before we get the same momentum as we had before the pandemic, but I think a lot of the actual actions will be able to get started pretty quickly. Please.
And one thing that we have that we did not have before the pandemic is the knowledge that the clear knowledge, deep knowledge that the status quo is not inevitable. We saw people talk about thinking outside the box. Well, when the walls of the box collapse around you, and you see that what you took for granted is not at all permanent, then I think it should embolden us to live in our visions. I really appreciate Sky's acknowledgement of the places that we are, and as settlers, I'm also on the traditional land of what are now the Puyallup people, and there's a very important. I think it's very, very important that we of in people, because the fundamental battle that connects the dots between all of the various issues that we care about is a battle of paradigms. It's a battle of seeing the world as a source of private property and extraction versus a place of relationship where nothing of actual value is for sale. So looking to Indigenous people and the paradigms and the leadership there is quite important. And also I would say, Sky, your call to action and your vision for the millions taking action. Another thing that we've gained through this COVID experience is that we know now that we don't have to all go to the same place. We don't all have to fly someplace, which is kind of counterproductive, right? Anyway, so maybe instead of 1 million people, it's 1 million communities taking action at one time and sharing that in solidarity across virtually, but not but becoming connected to the places that we live and committed to the places that we are as the indigenous people of these places, and following the leadership and to model what is that next vision, what's that next paradigm that we're moving into. Check.
And if I can just say one thing, picking up on the million communities idea, the film, follows people who are willing to take great risks and make huge commitments for fighting climate change. I do also think that there's certainly a place for people who are not willing to take a big risk, but want to show they're part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And what happened after Trump was elected, where the Women's March had millions of people all over the world, all over the United States, marching at the same time. So there are places for people to take great risks, and that makes a strong statement and is very moving. But there's also times where you just have to show, that you're a part of the solution and just get in the streets. And I really hope that we can, create these moments where millions of people come together just to show that we have to make these changes and sort of force the politicians to get in line. If you don't force them, they're bought and sold, and you have to make it so they don't have another choice.
Well, I think we answered Sky's question. I see she has answered, and she said she seems happy with the answer. We're slowly getting to the end. We've been talking for an hour now, or a bit more than an hour. You all tackle this idea or this question, but what would you say to someone who wants to take climate action today or tomorrow, maybe, because it's getting late here? Where would you start? If they don't know where to start, what would you say to them? Adam?
Yeah, sure. I'll go. So I think the number one thing you should think about is, what do you enjoy doing in general? What's your hobby? What do you think you're good at? What gives you joy? And then find some way to use that to contribute to climate action. There's always a way. There are millions of ways you can contribute to climate action, and there's always somehow you can use what you love to do, your passion, to contribute to it. And that's honestly, in my view, the best way to take climate action, because that way you will find a way to love helping the planet. And that's the best possible way you can have to keep the engagement up, even when it gets rough, as you can see in this film that it can get sometimes. But if you have this passion related to it, it's easier to keep going. So that would be my number one tip for sure.
And I think even more, if I can say something, that finding something you love is that everyone has resources. Some of us are more privileged than others, but I think we all have one little thing that we can all do at or our level, as you talked about local and global level. Well, think about your very, very local level, starting, I don't know, with your family maybe, or your household, whoever you live with. So, but someone else?
I agree with what Adam says. I feel like there's a lot of groups out there, but also one thing that I've learned is, like Bill's backbone is artful activism. So even if you don't feel like you're an artist, there's skill sharing. So what's so amazing is you may be really good at something and start doing that. But if you always wanted to learn another aspect of it, there's people that share their skills. And so I learned to climb trees at Bill's with my daughter at Bill's action camp, and that's really where I learned to climb enough for the tripod. I didn't go there thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to try. Like, you just, once you get into one of these communities, and you'll learn from each other, and then you'll maybe discover more what you wanted to do. Like I led a singing, chanting group at one of the actions, and before I risked arrest, there were a lot of action camps and rallies and actions to do with other tasks, and then you can find your place. Like I think it's mostly, like Adam says, just joining a community, and then you can learn within there. A lot of these people are a member of several communities, and you can find where you fit the best, because each community kind of has their own personality. But I mean, the bottom line is just show up and see what happens.
And also you have a talent for peep artwork. It's called Peeps artwork.
Okay, that's kind of an joke. You're gonna have to show a picture or something now.
No, it's from the film.
Right. It's in the film.
Peeps.
Yeah.
The little puppet things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, little candy toys that she made that model of the. Yeah,
Right.
That was brilliant. So I just want to build on that, and when I came to a place of figuring out what I wanted to do, because I asked that question with my friends. We had a potluck. We got together once a month. And I think it's useful to ask a question, wouldn't it be beautiful if, and this thing happened, or wouldn't it be funny if, and then let your imagination of you and your friends come up with a vision, and then look around like, okay, how do we manifest that vision? And that might be some virtual thing online, or it might be an actual thing. And what I love about artful activism is the idea that so many of the things that we're asked to do by other organizations or activists has to do with appeals to a very narrow group of people sometimes, people who feel comfortable writing a letter or signing a petition or doing a postcard. Well, there are lots of people out there who that's not their thing. You've got, so you can have welders or pilots or a drone pilots or artists or dancers or singers or farmers, and lots of ways for people to engage in making beautiful spectacle and doing something. The other thing is, I would say, don't be afraid to call your local media about it, because local papers and ITVs such, you have so much more likelihood of getting their attention than you do in the New York Times or some national, global paper. So go for that. And they like to have a local hook on a national theme or a global theme. So, climate is in the news, obviously. So what is the local group doing? What's the unique, funny, inspiring, beautiful thing that some local people are doing? I think we could have things in the news every day, from groups of friends doing something really beautiful or innovative or surprising. And I think it's when the people lead. This is what we know, right? Is that when the people lead, the leaders follow. We've lost any faith that the leaders are actually going to lead. That is a loss that almost never happens. But sometimes they follow, and we need to shift the culture so that they have no option but to follow for their own electability. And so, shifting what I'd call the political calculus, shifting the variables in what's politically feasible for them to do is absolutely essential. And I believe that our power is about culture, and we can shift culture. And you do that, I believe, through relationship, and you augment that through tools, but you have to have that in-person, person-to-person relationship building between people and the places that they love. Sure.
I just want to add one thing about the peeps. Is, how that came to be is our local mainstream newspaper had a contest every Easter, because those marshmallows are so popular. And so they had this Peeps contest where you could make some kind of diorama and photograph it and send it in. And so
and marshmallows shaped because in Sweden they may not have them.
They're in ducks and they're rabbits and yeah, those marshmallow sugar-coated Peeps. So my daughter we each did one, and my daughter did one because she was into gymnastics. She did a gymnastics one. But I thought to myself, okay, I like doing art. I went to art school. I'm going to make this political. Like I'm going to be subversive in this contest and try to send a message to try to get, like, I think the prize was $25 or something like that. But the prize for me would be like being able to artfully tell what's going on in the community. So mine was a little more political. And so I did make the Delta 5 action with the Peeps and the tripod, and I named it The Peeps Have Risen. And so it had this biblical aspect to it, tying it into Easter, but also like, yeah, there's oil trains in our community and people need to rise up. And so like, however you think you can insert into popular culture, like just do it. And it was so much fun to do. And of course they didn't choose mine, but it was
too.
Still
it was beautifully done. It was beautifully done. I saw it in person and filmed it.
And the people that won definitely were more popular culture, but not confrontational. But that the judges got to look at it, probably there was some kind of conversation that happened from it. But that's just an example of how you could act in some subversive way.
It's a great example, very beautiful example as well. Joe, would you like to say something? Otherwise, we'll wrap up soon.
Well, to start a documentary film, the type of film I make, you pretty much know you're going to spend 4 or 5 or 6 years. So it is quite a commitment to start this. And but there are people. Well, I mean, there's things that my wife and I do in our life that we try to contribute. And I think that everyone can find an organization and a group of people in their community. And what's clear from the film and from knowing Abby and Bill and Miriam and Michael is that, there's tremendous energy in that community and in just working towards something positive and knowing that you're doing something that's going to tilt things a little bit in the right direction. So everyone can do something, blog, film, protest, getting arrested, wearing a t-shirt, whatever it is, making a Peeps art project, and everyone can contribute in their own way.
Very much agree. They can also join We Don't Have Time. And in the name of We Don't Have Time, I would like to thank you very much for joining us today, Joe, Bill, Abby, and Adam. I think we all enjoyed this discussion, at least I have. Different resources have been shared in the chat, and they'll be emailed to all the participants of today. So you can find, for example, the contact to the Backbone campaign organization from Bill. And yes, I encourage to, you should have watched the film, but if you haven't watched the film yet, you still have some days to do so. So do that. And yes.
And you can tell your friends about the film too.
Exactly. Very much agree. You can write about it, tweet about it, do whatever to make climate action bigger and act more in your future if now you've been convinced to do so. Thank you very much. I wish you a good day and a good evening when it comes to Adam and myself.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you all.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to staying connected with you. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Hope to see more of you in the future.